So today we are continuing the discussion, the Mahavakyas, 4 great statements. So I already explained in the first lecture the 4 great statements of Vedic literature, which in a way describe 4 levels of human spiritual evolution. If you read the works of Swami Vivekananda, you find there's a great statement that he makes in the 3rd volume. And he repeats the same statement more or less with the same words in the Jnana Yoga lectures. That he says that, in our spiritual life, there are 4 levels of evolution, 4 stages of growth. We begin with some external rituals, reading scriptures, external prayers, chanting of hymns, psalms, and so on. And then we evolve to the next stage when we try to understand the mystical implications of these external ceremonies. Very often we get ideas from mythological books, so from rituals to mythology. And at the 3rd stage, we look for philosophical, metaphysical interpretations of these implications. And at the 4th stage, experience. Now, in many traditions, there was always a conflict, a confrontation between theology on the one hand and mystical experience on the other. If a person, if a devotee of God declares that he got the blessings of God and he feels an inner spiritual upliftment without necessarily following or without the intermediary of an institution or a priest, very often there was a conflict between the institutionalized religion and individual mystical experiences. So that was the reason why many of the great mystics had to undergo different kinds of persecution. It could be inquisition, it could be excommunication, but frequently post-mortem canonization. The recognition came only after their death. That was due to the conflict between the rituals, theology, philosophy on the one hand, and mystical experience on the other. Now, if you read these 4 great statements, Mahavakyas, in the Vedic literature, you find a reconciliation between theology, philosophy, and external rituals on the one hand, and mystical experience on the other. So I gave a bird view of these 4 great statements. First, the teacher instructs the disciple. That particular Mahavakya is Tattvam Asi. Literally, it means that you are. That here means the all-pervading, the immanent, supreme spiritual consciousness. And you here means the presence of the same reality as the immanent indweller in you are the same, which means we are one, creation is one, humanity is one. God, in the highest sense, lives in our hearts as an immanent divine principle. This is the essence of this particular statement. And it comes in the Chandogya Upanishad, in the Samaveda. It is called Upadesha Vakyam, which means it is in the form of an instruction. Remember, it is only an instruction at this stage. Now, if you instruct a mechanic how to operate a machine, he will understand it immediately. Or he can make use of the instruction manual. He doesn't have to think and contemplate and meditate for a long time to understand the meaning of how to switch on an electric switch. It is obvious. But this kind of instruction requires a much deeper process to understand its meaning. So the student listens to this instruction. Right now he has not understood. The teacher may explain to him in theory the full implication and the meaning. He may give a detailed exposition, but still the meaning is only a word for him. So there is a process that he has to undergo. He has to reach a level of spiritual fitness to really understand the implication of the instruction he has received. And Vedanta tells you, interestingly, this process of preparation or this process of attempt to become spiritually fit to understand the meaning may take several lives or may take several years, depending upon our own stage of evolution. You can very easily understand this in our own life. You read a parable in the Bible, with this Christmas season coming. The sower of the seed. Now, actually, this parable has got the same implication. What happens to the seed depends upon the quality, the condition of the soil on which it falls. If it falls on rocks, if it falls on thistles, if it falls on empty, barren, dry land, depending upon the condition, it may take some time. Some soils will preserve the seed, and maybe after a long time, if there is a heavy rainfall, this seed may sprout and become a tree. But if it falls on fertile soil, then immediately within no time it may sprout. So it depends upon the quality of the soil where the seed falls. This is just a parable. I'm giving one example from the biblical context. In the context of Vedanta, when the student listens to this instruction, he understands it. Right now his understanding may not be very accurate. But if he's a sincere seeker, he reads this, he contemplates, and then he tries to lead a pure life. When he lives a pure life, his mind, his intellect, his psychophysical mechanism undergoes a slow transformation and he reaches a level of fitness when he understands real implication. So this particular stage is divided into two stages. One is Siddhanta Vakya, which means Prajnanam Brahma, and Ayamatma Brahma, which is a stage of contemplation. So in the Aitareya Upanishad, which comes in the Rig Veda, there is one great statement. That statement is Prajnanam Brahma. Prajnanam means Prakashayana Jnanam. This auspicious, this comprehensive knowledge is Brahman. Because the spiritual reality manifests in the form of our innate, inherent awareness. So this is sometimes called Siddhanta Vakya. It is called Lakshana Vakya. It comes in the Aitareya Upanishad, Rig Veda. So please remember, I am going to deal only with the first of the four Mahavakyas during these lectures. We will come to the other Mahavakyas later. But to understand the true meaning of the first Mahavakya, we need to understand some background of the other three statements, Mahavakyas. Then, during this time of spiritual efforts, when the student tries to acquire spiritual fitness, he has to meditate upon the meaning of this. He should listen to this Mahavakya, and then he should meditate, and at that stage you should contemplate upon another Mahavakya. It's called Ayamatma Brahma. It's called Nididhyasana Vakyam. Nididhyasana means deep, intense meditation. Anusandhana means following mentally, intellectually, following the meaning, and then naturalizing the implication of this great statement. That is, this Brahman is this individual soul himself. And when he reaches a very high level of spiritual realization, he realizes, Aham Brahmasmi, I am that Brahman. This is called Anubhuti Vakya, the statement indicating the experience, the innate mystical experience. Now coming to the text, as I said earlier, the teacher makes this statement in the 8th Brahmana, the first statement. In the succeeding Brahmanas mean sections, the student tells the teacher, it's still not clear to me. Please continue. Please instruct me once more. So there are 8 questions. And in response to 8 questions, the teacher explains, gives 8 different explanations with the help of 8 different examples. So there are 8 drishtantas, 8 examples, 8 repetitions, 8 times the student requests the teacher to repeat the statement. From 9th Brahmana to 16th, the first instruction comes in the 8th Brahmana, 8th section. Brahmana means section of this 6th chapter of the Chandogya Upanishad. So in the 8th section, the teacher makes a statement. First, he instructs. In the subsequent sections, the student, the disciple, which happens to be his own son, asks the father to repeat it, to substantiate it, to explain it with some examples. And these questions and answers, this dialogue, constitutes one of the most celebrated philosophical, metaphysical expositions. If you read Schopenhauer, Paul Deussen, Max Muller, and others, you will get some grand statements in their works. If you ask me why, in wonder what's where and which place the highest spiritual wisdom happen to be the topic of discussion among sages and saints, I shall point to the Upanishads, to India. You find such statements in Paul Deussen, Max Muller, Schopenhauer, and others. When they first went through these statements, they were overwhelmed by the depth and the sublimity of this instruction. So we will come to some of those expositions and examples, so because they illustrate some of the important points. So you should remember the background which I made in the last class. The old man returned from his wanderings, Uddalaka, the great sage of ancient times who lived in the Vedic period in India, maybe around 5000 BC or 6000 BC. He was away from his home, and when he returned, he found his son had neglected his education, and he found that his son was not interested, didn't show much interest in Vedic education. So he sent his son to a hermitage to be taught by another teacher. And it returned after 12 years, and he was very proud and haughty. So the father wanted to make him understand the value of true wisdom and true humility. So he asked him, did you learn that highest spiritual wisdom makes you enlightened in the highest sense of the term? And the student said, no, I didn't know. I didn't get any such instruction. So father instructs him. At the beginning he says, he gives the example and he says, there is one reality, and that reality is the omnipresent, all-pervading, immanent, supreme consciousness, which is present everywhere, which is present in everything. There is only eternal reality. It is beyond time, space, and causation. It never was born, therefore it will never will die. It doesn't come into existence because it always existed. And it will never, therefore, cease to exist. And so it is beyond time, space, and causation. It's beyond relativity. While expounding this truth, he says, Vacharambhanam vikaro namadheyam mrittigetyeva satyam. So the meaning is, mrittika means clay. Now, suppose you have in front of you 10,000 utensils, glasses, pots, pans, all kinds of utensils made of clay. If you want to know the nature of the clay, the real property of the clay, you don't have to break every utensil and analyze the characteristics of the particular small quantity of clay out of which it is made. You just want, if there are 10,000 glasses in front of you or pots in front of you made of clay, you take one and break it and understand the property, analyze the property, the characteristics of the clay, that will be enough for you to understand the clay. So he says, there is only one clay out of which everything is made. Then what of these 10,000 utensils, pots and pans made of clay? They are only different forms and different shapes and different names. Clay in one form you call a glass, in another form you call it pot. Clay is clay. Similarly, the whole creation, the entire humanity is one spiritual consciousness. You realize this not as a doctrine, as a dogma, but you realize this as an inner experience when we evolve in spiritual life. So it is an experiential truth. That's what the teacher tells you. We don't realize this when we believe, when we read this. We should read this, and then there are some disciplines given here. When we practice unselfishness, purity of life, and higher values in life, which constitute the cornerstone of the spiritual practice, then at one stage you realize that God, as a supreme principle, lives in the hearts of all. Not only in the hearts of those who believe in Him, but in the hearts of those who may reject Him. So that's a funny statement made by agnostics. If God is so miserable that He cannot exist without your recognition of His existence. But this Upanishad tells you, whether we believe it or not, whether you accept or reject God, God as the inner principle, as the divine spark, as the omnipresent reality, as the immanent divine principle, lives in all of us. So in that sense, the whole creation is one. The whole humanity is one spiritual family. This non-dualistic philosophy doesn't reject other systems. But it tells you, as I said in the previous class, all other practices are only reaching a preparation to realize this. That's why you find genuine spiritual personalities in all traditions, and even genuine, really great men, even those who do not believe in God or in religions, what happens to them? What is the distinct characteristic of an enlightened person? He ceases to see differences. You have to see differences because you have to, when you cross the street, you have to wait for the bus, for the truck. You cannot move like that. Similarly, when you live in this world, you will find people of different types. We have to be careful. We have to have a discerning mind. That's true. But in our heart, we will have the conviction that humanity is one, creation is one. We won't be able to physically or psychologically or mentally do harm to anybody. This feeling of the innate oneness or unity of existence in our interaction with others. And along with that, a perfect serenity and peace and harmony within. These are the two characteristics of this spiritual evolution. You find towards the end of the 16th chapter. What is the tangible, visible advantages of this discussion? At the end of the Shankaracharya's commentary, he makes this point. When you reach the experience level of this spiritual instruction, first, we start having a strange inner feeling of completeness, perfection, and fulfillment within, which makes us calm and quiet and tranquil. And the same attitude reflects in our interaction with others. Harmony, peace, and brotherhood. All these higher humanistic values become natural to a person who reaches this experience level. So, before we go to the end of this chapter, I shall give some wonderful examples with the teacher presence before the student. As any of us will do, the student told the teacher, look here, you are talking about this Esha Anima Aidudatmimidam Sarvam Tat Satyam Sa Atma Tattumasi Shetakedo. This is the instruction that he repeats 9 times. So this subtle truth, this is the real truth, with the immanent spiritual principle present in all of us. It is not something outside, it is your own true essence, yourself. And you are that spiritual reality. You means not the physical thing. Once, if you understand that you have a higher spiritual dimension, beyond the physical, beyond the mental, beyond the intellectual, there is in you the spiritual dimension of your own identity, your real self, your real Atma. That Atma is this all-pervading reality. So naturally this teacher tried his best, but the student did not understand. So for the 3rd time, he asked the question, please instruct me once more. So the instruction is this: Saya Esha Anima Aidudatmimidam Sarvam Tas Satyam Sa Atma Tattumasi Shvetaketu. This is instruction. Bhuya Eva Bhagavan Vijñapayadu. Please repeat this instruction once more and explain once more. Teacher tells him, all right, I shall repeat. Now there is a wonderful example given. How do we understand this? The example is taken from external nature. I shall read the text, then I shall explain in detail. Asya soumya makado vrikshasya yo mule abhyahanya jivan sravet, yo madhya abhyahanya jivan sravet, yo agre abhyahanya jivan sravet, sa esha jivena anuprabhuda pepiyamano modamanas tishtadi. Now, example. The teacher points out a big tree in front of the hermitage. When the student asks, please teach me the highest spiritual truth, with some examples. The teacher, this is the third time. So teacher points a huge tree in front of the hermitage. You take an axe or some sharp instrument. You cut at the branch or at the root of the tree. Then what happens? Jivan Sraved, you find small, this liquid will ooze out of the tree. And you cut the branch, the same thing will happen. Wherever you cut in the tree, the life of that tree, which manifests in the form of this subtle liquid, will ooze out of the tree, will flow out. There is no difference. Now the point is, you don't see it from outside, but you see, if you cut it, you find this liquid is all pervading within the tree. The tree standing there, it gets its water, manure, everything from the earth. But at the same time, we don't see it outside, but it remains there. Similarly, this self, this Atma, as a supreme reality, exists everywhere, though we do not see it outside. Sometimes we may need another example. Sometimes we need a different tool to understand. That is another example given in the same text. The teacher asked the student to bring a lump of salt in the evening. The student brings it and then asks him to put in water, and then ask him to bring the same water the next day morning, and ask the student, now where is the salt? Salt is not visible. The previous evening, before the salt was put in the water, it was visible with his eyes. But now it is not visible to the eyes. You taste it. So if we make use of the sense of taste, you can see the salt is there. The previous evening, you used your eyes to see the salt. Today, you have to use another sense of perception, sense of taste, to recognize the existence of the salt. Similarly, there are many things that we may not be able to fully understand with the senses of perception. We need the instruction of a teacher. Now, in this context, there is another great illustration given towards the end of the text, where the teacher gives an example from a mythological story which I mentioned some time back. The story is taken from a mythological book, but it is incorporated in this Upanishad. A man was traveling from India to Kandahar. You'll be surprised to learn that in ancient times, even long before Alexander's invasion in 327 BC, to the northwestern parts of India, there used to be a land route leading all the way from northwestern Punjab, all through Afghanistan and Iran, all the way leading to Alexandria and Macedonia. So that's why it's said that many of the ancient Greek mystery religions were influenced by many of these thought currents, Socratic Greek philosophers. So there is an interesting example taken from an ancient text. A man was traveling from India to Kandahar, today's Afghanistan. So he had to pass through a forest. So as he was traveling, he was ambushed by some robbers. And he was, he was robbed of all his property, and he was taken into the thick forest, bound hand and foot, and left there to suffer. Yadha soumya purusham gandharebhyo abhinadhakshamaniyya tam tato adhijane visrujit sa yadha tatra prangva udangva pratyangva pradbhaniyya abhinadhakshanitoha abhinadhaksho visrushta. It's just a quotation, but I shall explain in detail. So the teacher tells him, a man was brought into a thick forest. He was ambushed, roped, and he was bound to a tree with ropes, and he was blindfolded. Now, in this story, the blindfolded man corresponds to a spiritual seeker. The journey from one place to another place corresponds to a spiritual effort, spiritual evolution. So, spiritual life itself is a journey. In this spiritual life, there could be robbers, wrong ideas, temptations, false promptings, false ideas, possibility of deviations. All these constitute robbers. Spiritual life itself is a journey from one place to another place, a pilgrimage. Now the question arises, suppose we fail in our spiritual life. Should we keep quiet? In this story, the next stage is much more important. So this poor man, this pilgrim, was robed and taken into a thick forest and kept there, tied to a tree, blindfolded. He couldn't see anything. He couldn't move. And the robbers left. Then what does he do? Should he keep quiet? The state of bondage corresponding to human life. Suppose we get plenty of money, plenty of wealth, and a lot of problems. If you do not feel the need for a higher meaning in life, if you don't feel the need for a higher relevance, implication for life, then what happens? We don't grow spiritually. So that's why it is said, the need of a high ideal, a kind of inner divine discontentment, higher urge for something higher, more sublime, meaning, implication of life. This is what distinguishes a highly evolved person from an ordinary person. A highly evolved people, even if they don't have any worry, any problem, they feel the need for a higher meaning. You know, in the Patanjali yoga system, sometimes we explain, it's called Parinama Dukkha, which is with the characteristic of a yogi. What is Parinama Dukkha? Dukkha means incompleteness, imperfection, sorrow or grief. Suppose we have got everything going on fine in our life. We have got money, wealth, comforts, everything. Still we feel, well, this money, this comfort, this wealth, they are not going to last for long. You cannot take your money with you when you die. You cannot take your relatives, your followers, your admirers with you when you die. So all these things are limited in scope. They are not eternal, they are not immortal. When you realize this, the transitory nature of worldly pleasures, worldly enjoyments, out of that comes a feeling of not sorrow, but realization of the transitoriness or incompleteness or imperfect nature of these external worldly pleasures. And that's the beginning of our spiritual evolution. That's what happened to Buddha. Buddha was born in a palace. He had luxurious life. He was not allowed to see anything miserable or unhappy in life. One day when he was traveling in the streets, he saw a dead body, a sick person, an old man. These three visions were enough for him to understand there is something wrong, there is something incomplete in this material life, which he did not know earlier. So that was the beginning of Buddha's real life. And he left his palace, his comforts, everything that night, went and sat under a tree and meditated. That was the beginning of Buddha's spiritual mission. Ihasane Sushchudu me sharidam tugastimam samcha vilayam chayadhu aprapya siddhim bhujarma durlabham naivasanat kayamadas chalishida. It's a great verse in the famous book Buddha Vijaya, the story of Buddha, the victorious life of Buddha by Ashughosha, belonging to 4th, 3rd century AD. Means I shall sit under this tree and meditate and contemplate on the meaning of life till I realize the true meaning of life I won't get from this seat. Now this feeling of incompleteness of material pleasures, though he was living in the midst of all that, transformed a prince into a world teacher. So this is what is called the spiritual urge. Now if you are a real spiritual seeker, then you will complain against the transitoriness, the imperfect nature of the external pleasures, even if you are living in the midst of them. Similarly, in this story, this man was taken away from the main road, taken to the thick forest and tied hand and foot to a tree. This condition of being in a state of bondage is material life. So he must shout, he must cry, he must weep. I am brought here. So, in this text says, so, abhinadhaksha anitaha, abhinadhaksho visrishtaha. So this man shouts, complains, my eyes are bandaged. I am brought here in this thick forest with my eyes bandaged and I am bound to this tree. This is my condition. And listening to this, some compassionate travelers who may be going through the same road may stop listening to his cries and shouts and go there and may untie his blindfold, liberate him from that state of bondage. But if he keeps quiet there, well, I'm blindfolded, I'm tied to this tree, this is a very wonderful, happy situation. Then nobody will listen to his cry. Nobody will know that a poor man is ambushed, blindfolded, and tied to a tree in the thick forest. Nobody will hear any sound. So he should shout. He should complain. In other words, he should feel a state of incompleteness, grief and sorrow with these existing conditions. And that's the first requirement for spiritual life. This feeling of inner spiritual divine discontentment. That's the beginning of spiritual life. And that's the beginning of a nobility. If we feel perfectly happy with all the things that we eat, with the wonderful clothes we wear, with the wonderful car we drive, if we feel that's the end, the beginning and end of life, then we won't go to a meditation hall, we won't read poetry, mysticism, anything. We won't care for music or art or literature. We will care only for what we eat, which will keep us in the same level of evolution as the animal kingdom. So, this feeling of inner discontentment, that's what brings us to a higher level of evolution. So, listening to this man's cries and weeps and shouts, what happens? Some compassionate person taking the same route will stop for some time, listen to this sound coming from the thick forest, go there, remove the blindfold, liberate him from this bondage. Similarly, in spiritual life, we should first of all recognize the reality of the transitory nature of worldly enjoyments, worldly perfection. Sorry, worldly perfection, yes. And then again, if the teacher brings him to the main road after removing the blindfold, after untying the ropes, then he should tell him, look here, you come here, come to this main road, you take this road. If you take this road, you can get back to your home. So, tasya yatha abhinakanam pramuchya prabruyat edam disham gandhara edam disham vraja iti. Sa grama gramam prichan pandito medhavi gandharaneva upasampadhyedai. Ivameva ika acharivan purusho veda tasya tavadeva chiram yavarna vimokshe adha sambatsit iti. Now this is the text may not be easily intelligible, but I shall explain in detail. Now then at the third stage of this story, the teacher brings him to the main road, then tells him, you come, this is the main road. He points his finger in the direction of the destination, of the place where this poor man was trying to travel. Then tell him, this is the direction you have to go. Gandhara means Kandahar. An ancient story you have to remember, maybe 5000 BC. So there were townships. So he tells this compassionate traveler, takes this man out of the thick forest, brings him to the main road, removes his blindfold and the robe and then shows him the direction of his hometown. You follow this route and then you can reach your home. Similarly, in spiritual life, once we feel this divine discontentment, then we may go to a library and read a wonderful book. Suddenly we feel, that's what happens to many spiritual seekers. Depending upon the intensity of spiritual urge, ideas register in our mind. It depends upon the intensity of our own urge, spiritual urge. If we read a spiritual book or listen to spiritual ideas, the way we listen to other mundane things, then they will register in our mind just as many other ideas. We read New York Times, we read San Francisco Chronicle, we also read the Bible and the Gita or Upanishads. Well, it won't make any difference. But a real seeker, when he reads the Bible or the Gita, he reads with a different mindset. The intensity of his urge will cause the ideas to register very strongly in his mind. And then his spiritual life begins. Similarly, you can see the condition of a man who was robed and beaten and taken to a thick forest, and suddenly somebody comes and shows him the correct direction to his hometown. So once he gets his instruction, he should start his journey towards his destination. On the road to his hometown, there will be many obstacles. There may be many other by-lanes and different roads. There will be different junctions where 3, 4, 5, 6 roads meet. So that may cause confusion. There may not be any clear markings. Or there may be marking, there may be directions, but then he may not be able to read those directions properly. For that he will need a spiritual fitness. So he has to start his onward journey even after he gets his spiritual instruction. So coming to the Mahavakya, as you find, Uddalaka taught the great truth to his student, Swetaketu. But Swetaketu doesn't fully understand the meaning. He has to evolve in spiritual life. Then only the meaning will become clear. Just as the parable of the sower of the seed, the soil should be made ready. Then only the seed will sprout and becomes a plant and a tree. So we should evolve. And when we evolve, we will develop an inner spiritual mechanism which will take us in the right direction. So the text says he has to go from place to place, and he has to ask people. See, my teacher taught me this is the road that takes me to my hometown. But here is a junction. 6, 7 roads meet. Which road should I take? There may be some enlightened people, traffic policemen standing there. So you can ask which the real direction. Which road should I take? So the text says, Grama Gamantaram Prichan. On his way, he should ask people. Similarly, in spiritual life, we should constantly engage in discussion on spiritual ideas. If you want to discuss something, discuss spiritual ideas. If you want to quarrel on spiritual ideas. Our natural activities of the mind, 5 senses of perception and 5 senses of action should be directed, oriented towards spiritual life. So engage in discussing spiritual ideas, dealing with spiritual persons, people who may help us in our spiritual pursuit. So we should be able to ask for direction. Asking for direction means what? So that's why Grama Gamantram Prichan is a text says. Text is a very wonderful text. He should travel from village to village. That's the meaning of Grama Gramantra. Prichan means you should ask. I am on my way to my hometown. What is a hometown? Or spiritual realization, spiritual fulfillment. That's a hometown. That's a place we are coming from. That's a place we are going back to. But right now we have lost the route. Somebody instructed us. And on the way, I was roped. So a compassionate traveler came to and helped me, rescued me, brought me to the main road, and asked me to follow this route. So we should ask people at different levels. When we have doubt, we should ask people. If you are not able to get the right persons to ask, you can ask the right persons by reading books. If we are reading great spiritual scriptures, we are indirectly asking the great spiritual mystics whose ideas are enshrined in the books. If you read the Bible, you are asking Jesus Christ. If you are reading the Upanishads, you are asking the great sages of ancient India. If you read the Dhammapada, you are discussing the Lord Buddha. So, if you cannot find those great persons, you try to find their ideas in the great books where their ideas are enshrined. And then gradually we will reach the stage. But there is one adjective used here, Methavi. Metha actually means purified intellect, the right intellect. The right kind of questions. There are 2 types of questions that we normally ask in spiritual life. One question, I am capable of asking some profound questions. Let me see if this man can answer me or not. Is one kind of question. Other kind of question, real earnest questions. So one type of questions is rooted in intellectual ego, which is like a cycle which goes on moving around in a cycle, a wheel, If you move around a wheel, you won't come out of it. The other question is like a straight line progression, where you are taken beyond questions. I can give the example of Swami Vivekananda. He was an agnostic, as a student he was an agnostic. He was studying in Scottish Church College and Presidency College. And in those days, people were reading positivists, evolutionists, then Marxian humanists in the last 2-3 decades of 19th century. In India, India's elite presidency towns, these were the topics. Darwin's Origin of Species, then Marxian humanism, neo-positivism, utilitarianism, and these were some of the fashionable thought currents. Swami Vivekananda was also, who was a product of a modern education institution, but he had a profound background in Indian spiritual traditions also. So he was an agnostic. So when he came to Sri Ramakrishna, he used to ask questions, and Sri Ramakrishna liked it. he found Swami Vivekananda was asking the question not as moving along a cycle or a wheel, but he was asking questions to know things. Now, if you are really asking questions out of earnest desire to know, then when you are convinced, you transcend, you go beyond that stage. You get out of this veil. But if we are asking questions not out of earnest desire to know, then what happens? We go on asking the same questions every week, every day, every moment. We are ourselves have forgotten we are asking questions, or what questions we are asking. So that's called Medhavi, Pantito Medhavi. A real spiritual seeker should be an intelligent person with the discerning faculty, and his intellectual quest should be pure. He should be asking questions with the real desire to know, so that if he could be convinced, he will go to the next stage. He will go beyond the stage of questions. He will transcend the stage of asking questions. That's why the Upanishad makes a very intelligent, very psychologically very profound statement. Sa grama gramantaram prichan pandido medhavi gandharaneva upasampadhyeta. So he asks questions, he reads books, he uses his intelligence. There's in Vedanta. You first listen to ideas or read books and understand the ideas, then use your reason, but you should not end with reasoning. That's what is called moving along the wheel. Questions not taking you beyond the stage of questioning. So that's why Medhavi means purified intellect. He reads books, he uses his reasoning power, and then he goes to the next stage, he reaches the level of experience. So Srutya, Yuktya, Swanubhutya is almost like a slogan Shankaracharya quotes in his commentaries. First you read the books, scriptures, the canon, or listen to ideas, that's fine. You need not blindly believe them. You can use your reasoning power, but use your reasoning power only with a view to go beyond reason, and finally you should reach the experience. Experience is beyond reason, but experience doesn't contradict reason. Experience transcends the realm of reason. It should never, it does not contradict reason. It is not in conflict with reason. Experience is beyond reason. So, that's why at the last stage, what happens? He attains that. Even yavana vimokshe ada sambatsye iti. So, slowly he reaches his spiritual experience. So, it's a very profound exposition. And now at the end, in the 16th section, after making 8 requests for repetition and listening to 8 new expositions with 8 new examples, Shvetaketu, the student, realized the truth. That's how this particular section ends in the Chandogya Upanishad 6th chapter. Anyway, those of you who are interested in knowing more about this, you can read this text, preferably at least the translation of Shankaracharya's commentary, that will make things more clear. 6th chapter of the Chandogya Upanishad. Thank you. Namaskar. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om. That's it. Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. Announcements. The subject for this Friday, Christmas Day, is the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita. Our Christmas program will begin at 11 a.m. and will also include special music, a reading of Christ's Nativity, and group carol singing afterwards. Childcare is provided during our Sunday lectures. On Wednesday evenings from 7:30 until 8:15, we have Vespers in this auditorium. Special announcements. After the Christmas program, there will be no lectures or classes until Sunday, January the 17th, since we will be on Christmas recess. However, there will be some special programs in the interim. On New Year's Eve, a meditation will be held at 11:30 p.m. with chanting from the Upanishads and other Vedantic scriptures. And on Friday morning, January the 1st, 2016, Sri Sharada Devi's birthday and New Year's Day will be celebrated with a special worship at 10 a.m. The program will also include a fire ceremony, homa, flower offerings by devotees, devotional singing, readings from the life and teachings of Sri Sharada Devi, and prasad luncheon. In the afternoon, there will be a special talk by Swami Chetanananda on some untold stories of the Holy Mother. So please remember, January 1st, Friday morning, there will be puja, and in the afternoon, there will be a special talk by Swami Chetanananda on Holy Mother. The topic is Some Untold Stories of the Holy Mother. Swami Chetanananda is a minister of Vedanta Societies of St. Louis and Kansas City. For more information, please see the special invitation in the foyer. On Sundays, all are welcome to use the library from 12:30 to 2:30 p.m. You and your friends are cordially invited to attend all of these services. As usual, after the lecture, there will be a question and answer session in Vivekananda Hall, and all are welcome. Om Yonta Pravishya Mamavachamimam Prasuktam Sanjeevayedi Akhila Shakti Dharasudhamna Anyamscha Hastacharana-sravanatvagadin Pranan Namo Bhagavade Purushaya Tubhyam. Let us meditate on the immanent supreme reality who is the essence behind whole creation. Om, peace, peace, peace.